I'm from the University of Surrey in the United Kingdom, and I'm going to present this work, Breaking Silence Through Laughter, Gender-Based Violence, Subversive Humor in Women's Stand-Up Comedy, in collaboration with Fabio Fasoli, Senior Lecturer in the University of Surrey. So I like to start with a sample observation. So humor is everywhere, in our conversation, on social media, and especially on the stage. But humor is not just entertainment. It's also a powerful social tool that can reinforce or change stereotypes. First, I would like to focus on the role of humor and its social functions. Humor plays an important social role, helping people interact, communicate, and build shared meanings. So research has also shown that humor can strengthen relationships and even promote social change. So the impact of humor depends on the type of humor being used. In this way, we can understand humor with a double-edged sword. First, maladaptive humor. That means humor used to reinforce inequalities and discrimination. And second, adaptive humor. That means humor used in the opposite direction. So to question, criticize, or combat status quo or injustice. Well, in this way, we can understand humor with this double-edged sword. So focus on the maladaptive humor. In fact, research has shown that women are often the target of maladaptive sexist humor. So sexist humor ridiculizes women, focus on negative gender stereotypes. More importantly, this type of humor are not harmless. The evidence suggests that exposure to sexist humor can increase tolerance towards sexism and may even contribute to the normalization of denigration against women. To better understand why sexist humor can have this effect, it's useful to turn to the prejudice dawn theory. According to this theory, humor does more than make people laugh. So it can also indicate what is socially acceptable. For example, when prejudice is expressed in a humorous way, it tends to be perceived as less serious, which lowers social norms against expressing prejudice. While humor can, unfortunately, be used to reinforce sexism, it can also be a powerful tool to change it. So, research has identified a type of humor known as subversive humor against sexism. This type of humor is primarily created and shared by women, and its main purpose is to criticize gender stereotypes and gender roles. Importantly, subversive humor is empirically distinct from others. For example, from disparagement humor, both men disparagement humor and women disparagement humor. So it's not a way of denigration, it's a tool of confrontation. You can see in the example, a joke aims to subvert common stereotypes about gender roles. Now, an important question arises. So, how do the audience respond to subversive humor against sexism? Interestingly, research shows that subversive humor against sexism can promote collective action, specifically among individuals with lower levels of feminist identification. In addition, subversive humor seems to be even more effective than the serious formats. in promoting participation in collective action in weaker feminist identifiers. These results underscore an important point. So the attitudes of the audience matter. Specifically matters when we use humor as a tool. Depending on the context and the individuals involved, for example, the audience, humor can serve as a strategy for confrontation, empowerment, and motivation for social change. So far, most studies has focused primarily on gender stereotypes and in gender inequality in general. So leaving other critical areas underexplored. This raises an important question. So what happens if we examine subversive humor that address gender-based violence? So could be similar than the subversive humor against sexism in the audience, for example, promoting social change or change harmful myths and norms. So before going any further, it is important to briefly define the broader context of our work. So gender-based violence is a global phenomenon that can take many different forms, include verbal or sexual harassment, murder or coercive control. And also importantly, this type of violence is most often perpetrated by intimate partners. So before going any further, it's important to briefly define the broader context of our work. So gender-based violence is related with the idea of a new line of research focused on humor with the aim to criticize gender-based violence that goes beyond to change gender stereotypes. So I like traditional subversive humor against sexism, which primarily address stereotypes and group dynamics between men and women. Gender-based violence, subversive humor, involves both a personal and a group dimension to coping with violence, not only with gender stereotype. So in practice, this type of humor is often used by survivors who share their own experience through humor. There are different examples that like a comedy show titled, for example, Asking for It, from Adrian Truscott, Patron Saint, from Kelly Bachman, and Red Jokes from Cameron Exposito. To advance in our understanding of subversive humor in relation to gender-based violence is to define and operationalize this concept in a systematic way. To explore gender-based violence, subversive humor in practice, this study was focused on a content analysis, analyzing results with a quantitative approach. So we identify and analyze a sample of 50 stand-up comedy videos, in total 1,016 narratives, in which comedians address issues of gender-based violence. We also use some keywords in YouTube to research the videos. By systematically examining these performances, we aim to uncover the themes, narrative strategies, and types of humor used to criticize gender stereotypes in general, but more focused on violence, change common myths, and raise awareness. To systematically examine these videos, each performance was carefully coded across several key categories. So We analyzed the frequency of different type of humor across the 50 standard comedy videos, in total 1016 narratives. And here is what we found. So subversive humor against sexism was the most frequent, appear in 158 time, and later the gender-based violence subversive humor appeared 92 times. So to give you a concrete example of gender-based violence subversive humor in practice, we consider this stand-up routine about the rape is real and everywhere show, in which the audience immediately recognize the red flags, creating tension and concern. So in relation to the main theme of the content, that means the main topic, we found that in this case, gender roles and stereotypes were by far the most frequent theme, about 239 times. And later, the most frequent type of violence was sexual violence, about 54 times. Here is an example about the comedy show Nanette, in which the comedian tells a situation in which she was raped by a man. For example, we can see the question: do you remember that story I told about that young man who almost beat me up in relation to a sexual violence story? Also, we examine the subversiveness strategies used in these performances. So that means the strategy of subversion employed capture whether the humor criticize harmful attitudes or reclaim the narrative for survivors. In this case, for example, reclaiming of the narrative was the most frequent, with 122 times, and later the disrupting dominant narratives, about 111. Also, changing or criticized attitudes was frequent, about 96 times. So an example of disrupting dominant narratives, for example, through this humor, the comedian exposed and changed dominant cultural narratives, in this case, myths about sexual attraction and gender dynamics, using the profile of Quentin Tarantino. Yeah. Also, we analyze the sociality in these standard performances. Here are the main findings. So, for example, the gender was the most frequent target, appeared about 277 times. And also race and sexuality was frequent. In the case of race, 41 times, and in the case of sexuality, 25 times. Everything in relation to 1016 narratives, of course. So finally, here is an example about the sociality in relation to the gender. So we can see in this narrative, the comedian are focused on expressing her gender. I'm a woman, I'm a woman, give it for me, I'm a woman. So finally, we analyze personal narratives. That means characteristics about the way to tell a story, such as, for example, autobiographical details, or expression of healing or disclosure of trauma. Regarding The subcategories, the autobiographical details, was very frequent, about 148 times. And also, the comedians use the third person. That means, for example, they talk about other experience, not only about own experience, about families or about friends that suffer, for example, discrimination or violence. So here an example about autobiographical details, um, which changes in time about the past of personal experience or thought. So in relation when the comedian was younger. Before concluding, I would like to highlight the theoretical and empirical contribution of this study. So first, this research extends the literature on subversive humor by introducing and operationalizing the concept of gender-based violence, subversive humor. So unlike traditional humor, subversive humor against sexism, which is more focused on gender stereotypes, gender-based violence subversive humor simultaneously integrate the personal dimension, including lived experience, trauma, or healing, and a collective dimension addressing structural violence. So, gender-based violence also seems to actively change prejudice norms by reversing the typical direction of ridicule and expose widespread myths surrounding gender-based violence. So rather than reinforce harmful stereotypes, it subverts them, encourage the audience to critically reflect on social attitudes. So additionally, the use of autobiographical narratives where comedians share personal experience of trauma, survival, or healing enhance the credibility of the message. So first, our research is based on a content analysis of a limit number of standard performances and primarily within certain cultural contexts. For example, English speakers. So looking ahead, future research could empirically examine audience reaction to gender-based violence versus humor, with, for example, experimental designs, including emotional, cognitive, and behavioral response to the audience to better understand the real impact of this type of humor. So this is only the first step. So thank you very much. Here is my contact and the contact of the co-author, Fabio Fasoli.